Sports reports, no gimmicks, no clowns. 2-5, Mr. Logical, we run this town. Real talk only, no chasing, no doubt. From the east to the west, it's the order we shout. Mic check, lights flash, game time, stay ready. 2 vets in the zone, keep the pressure real heavy. Big hits, big plays, yeah, we breaking it down. Truth rings in your speakers, every word is the crown. From the north side hustle to that southern flame. Midwest grind, west coast of the game. Sports talk kings, yeah, we wear that crown. Turn it up, let them know it's about to go down. Sports reports, no gimmicks, no clowns. 2-5, Mr. Logical, we run this town. Real talk only, no chaser, no doubt. From the east to the west, it's the order we shout.
It's about to go down.
Yes, it is Tuesday night. Free agency is here, and it's Sports Reports is ordered. I am 2-5, your unorthodox statistician, coming to you live from the Alamo. We got a lot to get to tonight, so like, review, subscribe, share, rate, do all the free things, do all the good things. Hopefully you got a liquid death in your hand by now. But hey, let's jump right in. Hey! Nah, 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 nah. Hey, hey, hey. Goodbye. LeBron James is not going to be a Laker next season. How does that make us feel out there? You know, all right, so look, on one hand, I kind of felt this was coming, or at least I was hoping it was. But now that it's actually here, I'm already sick of hearing about it, right? But I was thinking about this, right? So LeBron, you know, top 5 player of all time, top 3, whatever you want to call him, at this stage in his career, on the move one last time. You know, Aubrey Graham told us he made his career by switching arenas. And he's switching arenas again. Why? Because he feels unappreciated? Did he feel unappreciated when the Lakers went out and drafted his son at number 55 when nobody else in the draft was going to take his son? Did he feel unappreciated then? Oh, Mike said top 8, y'all. Dallas Mike in the building. What up, my guy? Top 8, he says. But you know, oh, wrong button there. My bad, y'all. But so LeBron James didn't feel appreciated. Is it when they got rid of his friend Anthony Davis that he said that he didn't know that this trade went down? Do we believe that? I don't think we do. At least I don't. You know, so I was trying to think about this, you know, in a logical way, no pun intended. And I said, if it wasn't Cleveland, and if it wasn't Golden State, where could LeBron end up? And I thought to myself, why not Minnesota? You know, they just picked up LaMelo Ball. They got Anthony Edwards. Getting LeBron there, I guess, would have people calling them a super team, even though LeBron's really only 2 years younger than me. That's one option. I like it, you know, but I don't know what you would have to give up to make that happen, you know, because if I'm the Lakers doing a sign and trade, I might have to ask for Rudy Gobert. I know that Minnesota's kept it kind of tight on Jaden McDaniels, so that might not be an option. They just re-signed Ayu Dosunmu for 5 years, $112 million. Okay. Then I thought, why not Dallas? You know, this is a team that just made the finals 2 years ago. Obviously, before that Luka Doncic, Anthony Davis trade. They got LeBron's old running mate, Kyrie Irving. You know, they got Masai Ujiri, who just ran out of options because Kawhi decided to go to Toronto. We'll get to that in a minute. But, you know, Masai tried to get a last-minute pitch at Kawhi, but Kawhi made it known that Toronto was going to be the only place that he re-signed. Okay. Then if it's not there, what about Denver? All right, so this one I'm still workshopping through, right? So I know that Jamal Murray is not necessarily on the market, but he probably could be had for Jaylen Brown. I'm not putting him in this deal, to leave Denver to go to LA. But Aaron Gordon and Cam Johnson sign and trade to the Lakers. That gives the Lakers a big shooter that stretches the floor in Cam Johnson. I know Aaron Gordon's been hurt over the last couple of seasons, but still athletic, a good defender. He can step out and hit the three from time to time as well, even though you don't necessarily want him to do that. Appreciate you do that over time. But that also gives Luka a lob option, right? Because that was the thing about Luka down in Dallas. You had Derek Lively Jr., Daniel Gafford catching those alley-oops because they weren't necessarily offering you much else outside of that. Well, Aaron Gordon can finish those alley-oops and, you can take Luka off the floor for a few minutes. Not because Aaron Gordon's going to dribble the air out the ball or set up the offense, but because he can score. Okay? So those are my three places that are not Cleveland or Golden State. But let's talk about Cleveland and Golden State for a second. So the Wizards have come out and said that they're not trading Anthony Davis or they're not listening to offers right now. So the whole big four, Steph Curry, Draymond, LeBron, Anthony Davis, doesn't look like it's going to happen. And why is that? Because Washington just gave Trae Young all that money. What would be the point of that if you were just going to give up AD? Right? Right. What were the Warriors going to give you? Were they going to give you Jimmy Butler, who is on the Kyrie timeline where is he even going to play next year? Is he not going to play until after the All-Star break? So if I'm a team like Washington, right, we just drafted A.J. Deboncha number 1. We still got all these young guys in the backcourt. Trey Johnson, who got drafted last year. Bub Carrington. You still got to find minutes for Cam Whitmore. Trae Young, like I mentioned. Bilal Coulibaly. There ain't no room for a Jimmy Butler. So, again, why would the Wizards trade Anthony Davis after giving Trae Young the contract that they gave him? Now, Golden State, Mike, to your point, they went out and signed Al Horford. Again, they re-signed him. They re-signed Porzingis. Why? All that did was take away money that you could give LeBron. Now, LeBron might be willing to take a little less money because he views Golden State as a contender once you add him there. Do I think that's the truth? I do not. I don't think that's a championship team. You still have to have depth, and you still have to have people that you can rely on. So while I'm looking at Golden State as an entity, Steph is not necessarily the bill of health guy. Porzingis, he has his pots. So who knows when he's going to miss time. Horford is about the same age as LeBron. So, and then you got LeBron. And now, granted, LeBron's been playing well over these last couple of seasons. But this is still another year that you're putting on those tires. Is that something I want to try to have to depend on in May? In June? He played well against Oklahoma City this year. But can I count on that another year? Now I go look at Cleveland. Now, I've been saying this for about 2 months now. Between Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, somebody got to go. This town ain't big enough for both of y'all. And I know that Evan Mobley's name has been mentioned in some of these Jaylen Brown trades. We'll get to that later. But I like that move better than I like, say, giving up a Mobley to go to LA. Maybe you give up Jared Allen. Depending on what you believe, the reports that have come out over the last couple of days, the Lakers would be willing to do a Jared Allen for LeBron James swap. Maybe that's why LeBron feels unappreciated, because Jared Allen, that's what you're going to get from me? Whatever. But he wanted to play with Anthony Davis again, which is kind of funny because I say, you already had him. You know what I mean? Since Anthony Davis, here you go, Mike. Since Anthony Davis got traded from the Mavericks, that was February 2025, not 2026, 2025. He's played 29 games. 29 total games this man has played. And then you wanted to add him to that Warriors team that I was just talking about? I think not. So now to make this work, the Cavs have to make some moves, right? So Keon Ellis is a free agent. Dane Wade is a free agent. Now you got to try to get a deal for Dennis Schroeder. Maybe you can offload him on somebody. Maybe you can offload Max Strus on somebody. But the problem here is you're bringing back James Harden potentially, and that's what it sounds like it's going to happen. He opted out so that he could get a lesser deal. Do I want James Harden and LeBron James on the same team? Maybe in 2017, but we're talking about 2026 heading into 2027. And I would take LeBron's old ass over Harden at this point. So that goes one step further. If I was going to bring in LeBron James, put him next to the Spider, put him next to Mobley, a.k.a. Baby Bosch, I could live with that. But now I got to add James Harden to the pot too? No. That's a good call, Mike. And the thing about it is, Cleveland is the Hollywood story, pun intended. Cleveland is the Hollywood story. So as LeBron says goodbye to Hollywood, going back to Cleveland, where it all began, 30 minutes from the crib in Akron. But to do that, you have to do your farewell tour. There's rumors that LeBron James is upset because he wanted a deal similar to what the Lakers gave Kobe Bryant those last couple of years. That 2-year, $48 million deal. You ain't Kobe. Now, I know a lot of people are going to have you higher than Kobe on the all-time list and all that kind of stuff. But we're talking about the Los Angeles Lakers. 17 championships, which Kobe has damn near a third of. That's why they gave him that contract. You got your contract. You got your championship. I ain't going to hate on you. I know a lot of people talk about the Mickey Mouse ring, the bubble ring, and all that. I'm not going to take that away from you because I think a lot of people that criticize that ring would not criticize it if somebody other than LeBron James won it, right? Now, as of August 6th, Anthony Davis is eligible for 4 years, $285 million. So if I'm the Wizards, you could have Anthony Davis next year because I'll make him play out this season and let his ass walk in free agency and get me some more cap space for next season. So if you could just hold out one more year, just one more year, you can have all the Anthony Davis you want, LeBron. That's funny, Mike. I don't even hate on that because you know why? Let me sidebar for a second, so we can talk about this. You know what I'm saying? I think that when it comes to championships like that, I look at it from the standpoint of all the teams are playing under the same rules. So it's not like the Spurs got to play 50 games and everybody else played 60. So they had that fresh legs advantage. You know what I mean? When I think about the bubble, they were all in the bubble. They were all stuck there. So I don't look at it that way. And if anything, I look at the bubble as, I don't want to call it tougher, but it's pure. You know what I mean? Because you could argue that some championships throughout history were won and lost depending on who had home court advantage. You took that away during the bubble. We just mano-a-mano at this point. Shout out to TJ Warren. Where he at these days? But LeBron James. People want to have the legacy conversation. And I don't think there's anything that you can take away from LeBron James at this point. He's played for 3 teams. He won a championship at least with each one of them. He's got all the finals MVPs of his championships. Even though I'm sure Dwayne Wade would tell you that wouldn't be true if LeBron would have showed up just a little bit in 2011 because Dwayne Wade would have had a finals MVP again in that situation. But at this point, is LeBron worth the headache? Because you still got to deal with clutch. You know what I mean? You got to deal with the media. You got to deal with the distractions. You know what I mean? And maybe that's true, Mike. That's a good point. That might be actually true. You know what I mean? But they all got rest. Kawhi got rest. Paul George got rest. All these guys got rest. But they got beat in the first round. You know what I'm saying? But so when I think of LeBron James at this stage in his career, if he doesn't win another championship, it's not a failure. I don't know how many people win championships at his age. I know Robert Parrish played late into his career. Kareem played late into his career. But they weren't as effective as LeBron is night to night. Now, of course, we can talk about eras, lack of defense, all that kind of stuff like that. But the truth is the truth, right? So I don't want to take anything away from LeBron James. But I knew the writing was on the wall once they gave Austin Reeves the contract that they gave him. And that's the thing with the NBA, right? Is that you get into these situations where other teams are coming for your players and you have to make a decision, because I'm sure the Lakers did not want to give Austin Reeves the contract that they gave him. But then the word on the street was, well, Detroit wants him. And depending on who you listen to, Luka is all about Austin Reeves. So, so from that standpoint, you're not going to let Austin Reeves walk. This is the Luka era in LA now. Me and Mr. Logical had this argument about 3 weeks ago. Luka's about to enter year 9 or 10. Or I think it's year 9. He's about to enter year 9. He got drafted in 2018, I think it was. This ain't the time to be playing around. This ain't the time to be wasting seasons. You've already done that. Right? So they bought DeAndre Ayton back, the Lakers. They bought DeAndre Ayton back on a 1-year deal. Looks like they're going to lose Marcus Smart to Houston. Mike, I don't know if you heard this or not, but the latest I've been hearing is the San Antonio Spurs may end up with Rui Hachimura. Wow. So the Lakers are losing a lot already as it is. So if I'm the Lakers, you might have to do some things that you don't want to do. You know what I mean? Depending on how this all plays out. Is there a world where you end up with Tobias Harris? You lost Marcus Smart. Is there a world where you wind up with Tari Eason? He's a restricted free agent, but Houston would have to match that. Correct. Zion, 8 years, no playoffs. If I'm the Lakers, I'm looking at Jalen Duren, and we'll get to him a little later as well. We got to get to a little later. But I would look at that as a real avenue, because as I was arguing with El Residente a couple of weeks ago, he was asking me, who are you going to get that's better than LeBron? I don't got to get nobody that's better than LeBron. But now I got money to where I can get a few dudes. So just going back to some of those names that I mentioned, right? Let's talk. Forget the Jalen Duren point. Forget that for a second. But I can go get me a Quentin Grimes to come off the bench. I can go get a Tobias Harris or a Jalen Wilson, young dude like that. John Collins, another guy that Luka could throw some alley-oops to throughout the course of the season. Keon Ellis off the bench. So I don't have to get somebody that's better than LeBron. I can just have a more complete team. I got the 2 scorers that's going to get me 25 points a game. So between Luka and Reeves, I'm getting 50 points already. You know what I mean? LeBron was going to give you maybe another 19 or 20. You know what I'm saying? That stretches you out to about 70. I still need another 40 points potentially to keep up. You know what I'm saying? Luke Kennard's a free agent. I don't think you bring him back, but just making a point. All right. Now, back to LeBron. So what does LeBron look like on the Warriors? I think you see beautiful basketball. Now, it won't quite look like Kevin Durant because Kevin Durant has that jumper. And I know, Mike, I know he's a loser. I know. But I'm just talking about the way that the basketball looked on the floor, how it worked. You know what I'm saying? Kevin Durant fit because he was willing to defer. And when Steph and Clay were being harassed by the defense, that made his job easier. There's no Clay around now. So this is just the Steph show. And what does LeBron and Jimmy Butler look like together? Right now, if this was LeBron even 4 years ago, maybe the defense can get you somewhere. But this version of LeBron is not playing defense. Jimmy Butler's coming off of ACL. Steph, I mentioned his injured past. So the Warriors have a whole lot of players that you don't know who's going to be there. And then what does that do to somebody like, say, Pods, right? Because the thought about LeBron is go stand in the corner and he'll find you. So even if Steph isn't on the floor and you're on the floor with LeBron, what is Pods going to get to do, right? And this is what we always talk about with these teams, these LeBron James teams, the Warriors of the last, say, 2 years. Where's the development? So the Warriors at one point had the double timeline going. They were warned that this wasn't going to work. They had the championship with Andrew Wiggins. They were so they had that, but then they went and got Kuminga and Moody. Well, Kuminga's gone. What you going to do with Moody, right? Kevon Looney is gone. He's in New Orleans. So you can do all this, and your center position is locked up because you have both Al Horford and Porzingis. But you got to be able to get up and down the floor, too. So I don't like this move. If he goes to the Warriors, I don't like this move on any level. Cleveland, I already talked about. I like it slightly better than Golden State. But for the fact that James Harden is there, I'm out on that one. So the teams that I mentioned, Minnesota, Denver, Dallas. Those are the three teams that I think that either should consider LeBron James or those are teams that he should be considering. But he's also, entering year 24. So there's that championship thing, right? He go to Dallas, you're probably not close to a championship. Cooper Flag's good. Kyrie will be back, potentially. Still not good enough to get you a championship. Denver, put him next to Jokic, you could be cooking with gas. Neither one of them plays defense anyway. So if nothing else, we get Showtime back. We get our late 80s Lakers back, from that standpoint, just in altitude. But going forward, Minnesota could be the place. LaMelo Ball takes the pressure of taking the creation away from LeBron. Anthony Edwards is going to be gunning for 26 to 27 points a game, if not a little bit more than that. You can move Jaden McDaniels back into that defensive stance versus the playoffs where the injuries made you rely on him for a little bit more offense. Now, any offense that you get from him is a bonus. You paid the Sumu, Terrence Shannon off the bench could be your sixth man. You do that, Minnesota might be that next level, right? Because I think going into next season, regardless of what happens the rest of free agency in the West, it still spurs Oklahoma City. Not saying that that's guaranteed to be the Western Conference Finals, but headed into the season, those are still the two teams. Because the Spurs went out here and said, we go get all the big bodies to protect Wemby. We got the Goon Squad with Jaden Quaintance and slipping my mind right now, who else they drafted. But, you know what I mean? They got those two big guys and they're ready to go, right? Oklahoma City addressed the weaknesses that they had. They had J-Dub hurt. They had Makai. I'm sorry. I can't even think of his name right now. I'm so sorry. AJ Mitchell. They had AJ Mitchell hurt. So the ball handling suffered and forced SGA to have to do too much from the standpoint of running the offense and still having to go run, the offense. So from that standpoint, OKC still got room to go, right? You know what I mean? Let's see. What do you think he's better to go off to an East team? So, okay. So Cleveland, I addressed. I just don't like the fit with James Harden. Obviously, you would have to move one of Jared Allen or Mobley. I would say Jared Allen. But Washington, absolutely not. I say that as a Wizards fan. We already got AD, who, like I said, he's only played 29 games since he's been traded from Dallas. Now you're adding a 41, 42-year-old to that, who I have to imagine that his body's going to break down And, he's going to miss some games throughout the year. But you just drafted A.J. DeBoncha. You still got this whole slew of dudes that you're trying to develop, figure out what their trade value is. Maybe at the trade deadline, you see Washington make a lot of moves. And then they were just saying this morning that Washington's interested in Russell Westbrook potentially. He still averaged 15 points in Sacramento this past season. But he's 37 years old. He's about to be 38. So they went from one of the youngest teams in the league to AARP. You know what I'm saying? So, no, I don't like him in Washington. Boston could be interesting. But to do that, you would potentially have to sign and trade LeBron for, say, Jaylen Brown. Now, is that a thing? Because if I'm Boston, I think that I could get more for Jaylen Brown than LeBron James. Like, I don't know what else the Lakers would have to give up in that scenario, in that sign and trade scenario. But if I'm Boston and you call me talking about give me Jaylen Brown for LeBron James, lose my number, besides the fact that I don't even know if the Celtics and Lakers would make a deal with each other anyway. So now, as far as walking on as a free agent, that would take LeBron to take a super pay cut, which, if we know anything about LeBron James, is that he doesn't take super pay cuts. So we'll see. I don't know. But Kawhi Leonard, back in Toronto, the place that he should have never left. Remember that? 2019, beat the Warriors, NBA champions. Oh, my goodness, the Raptors bring the title to Canada. The Sixers celebrating. What next? Somebody got homesick. Then not only did he go to the Clippers, but then he decided that he wanted to bring Paul George with him too. And I'm not even going to make fun of Paul George right now. You know why? Because if you remember, the Clippers put that team together with championships as the aspiration, right? So let's walk this through. So they go to the bubble. They blow a 3-1 lead to Denver, right? The next year they come back, actually make the Western Conference Finals. But there's one problem here. Kawhi was hurt. It wasn't even Paul George this time. Paul George won the playoff series without Kawhi. That got them to the Western Conference Finals, where they eventually fell to Phoenix because Kawhi couldn't make it there. After that, Clippers ain't done a damn thing, right? So now you got this youth movement going on in LA. They brought in Darius Garland, Benedict Mathurin. They went and got Keaton Wagler in the draft. So now the Clippers don't have room for Kawhi. And, oh, by the way, are we ever going to get some resolution on this situation with Kawhi and Ballmer? Is Kawhi going to get suspended? Are the Clippers going to be in trouble? Whatever happened with that? Remember that? Pablo Torre investigates? Well, so Toronto would have made it work in the first place with Kawhi. He didn't have to go to L.A. Dallas tried to get involved at the last minute. Masai Ujiri wanted that old thing back. The Spurs were interested. I'm glad he didn't go to the Spurs. Now, granted, if Kawhi would have ended up on the Spurs, then I think that might make OKC tremble just a little bit. Just a little bit, if he could stay healthy. He did play 65 games this year. So that's that. That's a start, right? But now he's going to Toronto. And what did Toronto give up? They gave up Brandon Ingram, Grady Dick, 2 first-round picks, a first-round swap, and 2 seconds. Now, why is that important? Because if you've been watching Sports Reports Disordered, you've been hearing me rave about Scotty Barnes. It took him a little while to get to this point, but now he's a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. The offense can flow through him. Emmanuel Quickley was out for the playoff, and if not, they might have beat Cleveland and been playing on. So from that standpoint, Toronto was already on the right path. And I don't mean no disrespect, but I do a little bit. I can't lie. Once Toronto finds something to do with R.J. Barrett, they really going to be cooking with gas once somebody takes them off his hands. But Jamal Shedd's a free agent now, but you got Kawhi now. So this is not a move to secure a top 2 seed in the East, even though they very well could. This move is for May. This move is for June. Because who knows how long Kawhi got. He played 65 games this year, but that's not the norm for him in recent years. So this is an ultimate high risk, high reward. And that version of Pascal Siakam ain't walking through that door. Fred VanVleet ain't walking through that door. Kyle Lowry, the door that fell on him. So this is not the same Toronto that Kawhi left. But with Scotty Barnes, the only thing they're really missing right now, in my opinion, is a big man. I don't know if Jakob Poeltl is the guy to continue to go forward with. Toronto. So if I had to handicap it right now, as we sit here on June 30th, of course, I don't know, man. Like, the Knicks would still be the number 1 seed. I would imagine most people would say Toronto's the 2. But until Boston comes off Jaylen Brown for real, I would have to probably put Boston at 2. Then you got Cleveland and Toronto probably duking it out for 3rd. The Sixers should be in that conversation, but Joel Embiid's knee, right? Joel Embiid's everything. So they're not in that conversation. So I think that Toronto is going to be scary come playoff time if they can manage Kawhi enough to get him there. Because that's what Toronto was missing this year, that closer, because Brandon Ingram is a very talented basketball player. But he's Eeyore. I don't think I've ever seen him smile. Maybe that one time he punched Chris Paul, he might have let out a little smirk, but that dude is just always just there, jacking up shots. He played well this season, but you know what? If you're Toronto, you're a little happy because he stays hurt too. So I traded one injury for another, but a guy with 2 championships, 2 finals MVPs, one of the best perimeter defenders that's ever played the game of basketball. I'll make that trade 9 times out of 10 if I'm Toronto, regardless of how old Kawhi Leonard is. Because one thing that you know about Brandon Ingram is that once he's on your team, you just are what you are. You know what I mean? You ain't getting no better per se. Like, you might win an extra couple of games, but you're not guaranteed to get out the first round of the playoffs. You know what I'm saying? Now, where does that leave Miami in all of this? I didn't forget about them. They brought in Tim Hardaway today. Great pickup. They need some shooting. So your starting lineup is probably going to be Davion Mitchell, Tim Hardaway Jr., Andrew Wiggins, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and 83-point man, Bam Adebayo. All right. Norm Powell looks like he's the odd man out. So somebody like, say, Chicago should be on line 1 trying to secure his services. Charlotte, we've been talking about this LaMelo Ball trade. For those of you not tracking, I'm okay with the LaMelo Ball trade because in the NBA, you're always playing for the future, right? The future is now because if you go back, they traded Miles Bridges and brought in Grayson Allen and Royce O'Neal. So what do you need to win championships? You need role players that are great at their role. You need guys that can make the defense afraid and have to challenge their 3-point shot, which opens up the rest of the floor for a Brandon Miller, for a Kobe White to get to the rim. And, oh, by the way, Con Knipple just led the league in threes as a rookie this year. So I like the trade. You know what I mean? Especially when I look at Jokic being a free agent next year. He hasn't opted in. $62.8 million is what he would be due next season. You got Steph Curry, depending on what happens with the Warriors, what happens with LeBron James. Is it time for Steph to go back home and have his swan song? That's just my thought, right? That's not reported anywhere. That's just my thought. So you got better free agents next year. And if you want Anthony Davis, if the Wizards don't max him this year, guess what? Free agent next year. So from that standpoint, I like where Charlotte is sitting, even though I know a lot of people are down on them because, you don't trade your stars. But at some point, I think Brandon Miller is going to be a max player. I do. Khan is going to be a couple years behind him, but still something that you have to take into consideration. So if I was the Hornets, I would run him back one more year. But the Phoenix Suns picking up Miles Bridges does nothing for me. He's a talented player, but Matt Ishbia is doing this Michigan State thing. As a Commanders fan, it reminds me of when we hired Steve Spurrier as head coach, and he started bringing in Danny Werfel and Chris Doering and all these Florida Gators. So Ishbia's got Mateen Cleaves, in the building. Jordan Ott, the head coach, is a Michigan State guy. He's just putting Michigan State guys everywhere. Miles Bridges. He brought in Tyson Walker last year, undrafted. For some, this guy is just trying to recreate Michigan State. The Suns ain't going to go anywhere. But let's talk about Jalen Duren for a second. So, had a bad playoff. I can't say anything better. He had a bad playoff. Started out okay against Orlando. Then the last 4 games of that series, he just tailed off. Those first 2 games against Cleveland, the Pistons looked like they were going to go to the Eastern Conference Finals. And then Evan Mobley found his ball somewhere. And so from that point on, Jalen Duren was rendered ineffective in a lot of ways. We started seeing a lot more Paul Reed, Stewart was already ineffective, and he's gone to Memphis now. So now if you're Detroit, you're playing a very dangerous game. You're playing a very dangerous game if you're the Pistons. So you don't want to max Jalen Duren, right? And I get it. After that playoff performance, I probably wouldn't want to max him either. But the good news for Detroit is that he's a restricted free agent, meaning that if somebody offers him something, you can make the decision to match or not. And now 2 teams are being involved that we're hearing about now. We've heard that today he's meeting with Sacramento, potential sign and trade because they couldn't sign him straight up. And then the Lakers that we talked about earlier. So, with that being said, right, if you're Sacramento, or I'm sorry, if you're another team, just take Sacramento out for a second. If you're another team and you offer him as much as you can, because remember, your current team can offer you the most. But if you're a team that can't offer that 5th year, but you give them a 4-year max, if you're Detroit, now do you match that? What's the alternative? So think about it, right? A sign and trade with the Kings. Jalen Duren for Domantas Sabonis. What do we think about that? I'll tell you what I think about that. I think that would be great offense as far as the pick and roll, some screens and handoffs. Cade Cunningham would love that. He would probably have some of the most fun he's going to have in the NBA in his career, right? But then there's another side of the ball. The good news is Domantas is such a great rebounder. The bad news is come playoff time, he's going to get punked around. You remember Light the Beam? You remember how Draymond took his heart straight out of his chest? Yeah, that's Domantas Sabonis. So if you're Detroit, fuck around and find out. That's where I stand on that, right? Okay, let's say it's not Domantas Sabonis. Let's say it's Zach LaVine. He just opted into his $49 million deal. Whew, that's nuts. But hey, if you bring Zach LaVine to Detroit, you got him and Isaiah Joe, 2 shooters off the bench potentially. And of course, you might have to, start him in that scenario. But, when you look at it that way, Detroit can't play these games. You can't go into next season with what? Paul Reed, said as your starter, saying like Detroit, you know what, Mike? Detroit going to mess around and end up with Vucevic if they keep playing these games. I'm looking at this free agent list right now. You got Vucevic, Zach Collins, Mitchell Robinson, Mo Wagner, Kevon Looney, Andre Drummond, Nick Richards. And that's before I get into all the names that nobody cares about. Now, maybe, said if you want to do this sign and trade thing, maybe call Utah. Walker Kessler's looking for a contract. He's looking for a contract. He felt insulted by what Utah offered him. They offered him 5 years, 140. I don't know what he think he's worth. I think that's a good deal. He's coming off of injury, missed the whole season. So Detroit, you got to shit or get off the pot. Which brings me to Jalen Duren for Jaylen Brown. Is that a thing? Could that be a thing? Jalen Duren, because when you go back and look at Boston, and I don't want to overreact, right? Joel Embiid, the 3-1 lead that Boston blew. Obviously, Jason Tatum got hurt at the end of that series as well. I don't think Boston has to necessarily overreact and get a Jalen Duren. But if you're trying to get rid of Jaylen Brown anyway, you could do a lot worse than Jalen Duren, right? Now, that's where who's going to call for Derek White? I imagine we're going to hear his name sometime soon too. But Boston's talking about they want 4 first-round draft picks for Jaylen Brown. That tells me one or two things. They just talking, or they're waiting for Jaylen Brown to, air quote, come to his senses. Because Jaylen Brown, is being disrespected all across the board. It was one thing when it was coming from the Celtics. Okay, cool. Now everybody's piling on in the media. Smart young dude, never got in any trouble. Has been a part of the Players Association. And now we're going to make him sound like he's a malcontent. This is a guy that teaches at MIT. Like he's basically an astronaut. And we're sitting up here trying to talk about this dude as if he's a malcontent, if he's causing problems in the locker room. Where you at, Jason Tatum? Can you come defend this man or something? But anyway, so back to the trade machine, right? Jaylen Brown for Jamal Murray and Cam Johnson. You know what I'm saying? Put Jaylen Brown next to Peyton Watson, because Denver wants to keep him. Christian Brown, the odd man out. Portland. Could you imagine all the things that we've been talking about Tim Duncan, right? Stadium issues, trying to get the city and the taxpayers to kick out all this money for renovations. He didn't want to do the T-shirts on the chairs for Game 3 of the first-round series. He signed his coach to team options. Could you imagine Portland getting Dame Lillard back, and before he plays another game in a Portland uniform, Dundon trades him again? That would be, you talk about public enemy number one. He better take his ass to Carolina with his Stanley Cup champions if that happens. Jokic is up next year. That's why I keep talking about Denver. So you got to do something. You have to give Nikola Jokic a reason to think that he should resign with you, because you can't just take it and think that we can offer him the most money, because something tells me money doesn't motivate Jokic in that way. Now, don't get me wrong. Everybody wants to get paid. But I think Jokic is the type of personality that would turn down $63 million if he could go get 50 and have a chance at a championship. And that's easy for me to say from this seat, right? I don't know the difference between 50 and 63 million besides doing math. I ain't seen neither one of them. But one more team for Jaylen Brown that I don't know if I've heard mentioned yet. No, I'm not going to say the Mavericks because I brought them up for LeBron. But what about Jaylen Brown to Orlando? Is it time to break up Wagner and Paolo? Have you reached where you're going to reach with those two? Maybe not, because Orlando still needs a point guard at some point that they still aren't trying to get for whatever reason. Like, I look at them, even in the draft, I mean, granted, they had a second-round pick, but they took a guy that's probably not going to play for 4 or 5 years. So if you're Orlando, are you looking at a Colin Sexton? Marcus Smart is off the board. I don't think you want to bring in Russell Westbrook at this point in his career. Could Jamal Shed? I like him a lot, out in Toronto. Could he be an option for point guard for Orlando? Outside of that, lots of slim pickings out here. Maybe You bring in a Gary Payton Jr., but I don't know if he's a full-time point guard, more or less just a small two for defensive purposes. So you pretty much already got that with Jalen Suggs, who's a little bit bigger than him. But I don't know if, it might be time to move off of Jalen Suggs. So I think that free agency is just beginning. Obviously, today was the day that it opened. But I think we're going to see more trades over the next few days. Some of them might even make us scratch our heads because, we got these aprons now. You saw Sacramento draft Devin Carter, son of Anthony, 2 years ago at number 13. They just traded him to Atlanta for nothing. Said because, they're trying to get right. They got Levine at 49. You still got Sabonis. And then what are you going to do? Allegedly, the reports is that they're going to try to trade DeRozan. But if they can't, they got to waive him. So they might be eating some of that. There you go. Portland brought in Ja Morant. I don't know how to feel about that. Now, from a sense standpoint, trying to make sense of it, it's a great move because you're talking about a guy that was drafted number 2 in the draft who has shown that he can lead teams to success. Memphis was just a 2 seed 2 or 3 seasons ago, and they didn't necessarily have a lot of star power. So now you add him to Portland, where they have a lot of talent, right? Now, early reports are they're going to start Ja and Dame together. I would advise against that, but hey, do what you do. You still got Captain Drew Holiday. What do you do with Scoot Henderson? Now, early reports are they think they could keep all 4. I don't know because you still got Shaedon Sharp. Obviously, Diddy Avdia. Portland led the league in drives this season, drives to the basket. And they're picking up a Ja Morant. So you might need to keep a Drew or a Dame because what if the defense says you can't come in here no more? You got to have somebody that's willing to knock down shots and able to knock down shots. Now, Toumani Camara improved his three-point shooting this year, and you hope that continues. If so, Portland might be a team that's going to be involved in the next couple of seasons as far as being a spoiler at the very least. They got Donovan Clingan in the front court. You got Tom Lord. They brought back today 3 years, $44 million. So what's the deal look like for Jaylen Brown there? Do you go Scoot Henderson? You're not giving up Kamara. I don't think you're giving up Clingan this early, and that wouldn't even make the money match anyway. So at this point, what do you do if you're Portland if you're trying to get a Jaylen Brown? I think that would be a good spot for him. You know what I mean? It would definitely, be his team. I think at this point, we can say that he's better than Ja Morant, especially since Ja Morant is rarely ever on the court. So something to keep an eye on, right? Isaiah Hartenstein back to OKC, 3 years, $75 million. So the other thing about OKC now is that they have given Lou Dort his option, but could he still be on the move? Because if you're OKC, you're checking the tea leaves. Everybody around you is making moves. You don't need to overreact, but you need to keep your eye on the ball, right? Because that's the worst thing that you could do is stay stagnant. So they already lost Aaron Wiggins. He's in Atlanta. They lost Isaiah Joe. He's in Detroit. Kyrie Williams is a free agent. We'll see what they do with the other J-Dub. So, let's see. JB to the Bulls. All right, Mike, walk me through this. What the Bulls giving up to make this happen? And don't try to be slick and say Caleb Wilson either. But that would definitely give Jaylen Brown his own team. And I think that's what he's looking for. So I think at this point, Jaylen Brown would go just about anywhere just to prove a point. I don't know about, Sacramento, let's not get crazy now. But, I can see Jaylen Brown. I've heard Houston. being suggested by the media. I don't like that at all because you already got no shooters on that team besides Durant, really. Van Vliet will be back, but we'll see how effective he can be. So, yeah, Cason Wallace is a good one, Mike, because is it time for him to go now? You know what I mean? I would want to keep him the way that he performed in that Game 7 against San Antonio, but that's where you start getting into the money aspect, those aprons. Because I think from what I was reading right after the Western Conference Finals, it sounds like SGA really wants Dort back. The same way that I was talking about Luka and Austin Reeves. So let's see, 2 firsts, Pat Williams, Anthony Simmons. Oh, Montas? You would give up Buzelis? Wow. Okay. That's not a bad deal. You know what I mean? If I was Boston, after I'm done being insulted that you brought up Patrick Williams, after I go regurgitate a little bit, you know what I mean? I'll come back to you and you know what I mean? I'll probably buy Pat Williams out or, see if I could flip him, maybe get a third team involved that'd be willing to take him on because his contract is nasty. It's good for the times, but for the level of player that he is, it's nasty. So, but that's not a bad deal. That's not a bad deal, but the Bulls got a lot to figure out, Colin Sexton, what they're going to do. So we'll see what happens there. I mentioned Russell Westbrook to the Wizards. No, that's all I'm going to say about it. It's been quiet down in New Orleans, which leads me to believe that Jaylen Brown could be New Orleans bound, maybe. Because ever since the NBA draft came upon us, all I heard was Trey Murphy this, Trey Murphy that. Everybody loves Trey Murphy. Now, of course, Joe Dumars wants 3 firsts for him. Come on now. Let's not be crazy. Zion averaged 21 last year. He played 62 games, which was the second most of his career. Only the third season, he's had 3 seasons where he's played 30 or less. So, you know what I mean? Could Jaylen Brown end up in New Orleans? What does that look like? I like fears. Maybe could Boston get, say, a DeJounte Murray or Jordan Poole with a Trey Murphy? Because I don't know if you could do Murphy for Brown straight up with the picks. You still, again, have to make the money match. So you would have to give up somebody. I think New Orleans is going to keep Messi, and he doesn't make enough money to be a part of that without more players added. So I don't think the idea is give up 3 to 4 players and these picks if I don't have to. And especially at this point where Jaylen Brown is a distressed asset. You know what I mean? Like, this is one of those situations where I get upset at these NBA teams because you just tell everybody what's going on. Either you wait too long and you wait for the player to ask out, or you make it known that the player is available and then you lose all your leverage and you can't get what you're supposed to get. You know what I'm saying? Like, using Giannis as an indicator, we saw what Milwaukee got for him. And at this point, I don't know, outside of picks, I don't know what Boston's getting. It might have to be a 3-team deal, to be honest with you. Andrew Wiggins, I mentioned him earlier. He's back with the Heat. 3 years, $64 million. Now the question is, to get players in there, is Miami going to have to come off of Nikola Jovic? I said Jovic, not Jokic. But also, with that being said, if not, or even if they do, where does Miami go now? Is Miami in that Buddy Hield market now? Bradley Beal's a free agent, still getting paid. He's the 4th highest paid player on the Suns. It didn't even play for him last year. He was in LA. So could Bradley Beal be an option? Do you want Bradley Beal if you're Miami? It's a nice name. It makes sense. Like, when you say it out loud, it's like, oh, yeah, I can have Bradley Beal, and I don't need to rely on him to get me 20 points a game, but you're still talking about Bradley Beal. So, no. Leave that for, the not the Hornets, the Pelicans. Leave that for teams like that. You don't need Bradley Beal. I talked about Walker Kessler. So Utah's got some thoughts, right? They just brought in Triple J. They still have Lauri Markkanen. There's rumors that Ace Bailey is going to have to play 6-man, or at least that's the idea that they're floating around within the organization. So, that could be a Jaylen Brown fit if you really wanted it. But now that you drafted, Peterson, I think your team is complete and it's time to actually try to make the playoffs now. That's just my thought. So there's a lot going on around the NBA right now. I think that free agency is the best time of year. I'm happy that Toronto was able to some closing thoughts here. I'm glad Toronto was able to keep Colin Murray-Boyles, because if I was the Clippers, that would have been probably one of the first people I would have asked about just looking at youth. So the Clippers, I'm guessing, are going to bring back Mathurin. Darius Garland is in place. So it's going to be interesting to see where we go from here. Maybe Miami ends up with a Chris Middleton type. Because I know that's funny to think about, but you still need those guys on your roster to help the youth. Maybe they could go get a Kelly Oubre type. He's out there as a free agent. It's a lot going on. But, hey, good news, bad news. The next time you see Sports Reports is ordered, it's going to be time to talk some football. It's going to be time to start previewing these conferences, college football, setting that up, getting ready for some NFL. The bad news is we won't be back until July 14th. It's vacation time. So thank you for everything that y'all do. Thank you for being here. Like, review, subscribe, share, rate. Do all the free things. Do all the good things. Liquid Death in hand. Special shout out to Mr. Logical, the cool, calm, collected. Born in Texas, raised in Virginia, representing everything New Jerusalem. Shout out to Dallas Mike, Cups in the gang. Shout out to Say Less, Say More. Sports Reports is ordered. We'll be back again, July 14th. I love y'all. You will still see clips, and I will still be on here from time to time just saying what's up. Sports Reports is ordered. Out.
Sports reports, no gimmicks, no clowns. 2-5, Mr. Logical, we run this town. Real talk only, no chasing, no doubt. From the east to the west, it's the order we shout. Mic check, lights flash, game time, stay ready. 2 vets in the zone, keep the pressure real heavy. Big hits, big plays, yeah, we breaking it down. Truth rings in your speakers, every word is the crown. From the north side hustle to that southern flame. Midwest grind, west coast of the game. Sports talk kings, yeah, we wear that crown. Turn it up, let them know it's about to go down. Sports reports, no gimmicks, no clowns. 2-5, Mr. Logical, we run this town. Real talk only, no chaser, no doubt. From the east to the west, it's the order we shout.